then what are we oh, sorry, that's just letting me know we're being recorded. So as I've said, this will be available for you afterwards. Yeah, so it will be available for you afterwards. Apologies for that. So then we're going to discuss the level 5 laboratory scientist standard and endpoint assessment this morning. Obviously, I'll give you a bit of an overview as to who SIAS are and what we do. If you've been in this before, you will know this verbatim by now. We'll talk a little bit more about the lab scientist, the endpoint assessment methods, but equally how we get there as well in terms of the project and what that should look like. We'll think about how we track the apprenticeship, preparing for endpoint assessment, and then the registered assessor and the endpoint assessment. Now, remember, the registered assessor is the employer-nominated contact who is competent in the area that's being assessed. Okay, so this is terminology taken from the assessment plan. It is not that the employer contact should be an actual assessor. All right, and then we've got some space for questions at the end. So as I've said, if you've got questions as we're going through, please put them in the chat and I'll address those ones straight at the end. And equally, if you just want to wait at the end, then you can put your hand up and we can go through like that. Okay, so then who are we? Well, we're the Science Industry Assessment Service. So we specialise in endpoint assessment for roles within R&D, production and engineering and analytical services across the whole of manufacturing, science and the health sectors. So we're broadening out now. We were first sort of came about in response to the science standards, and we're sort of a little bit bigger than that and moving into the engineering sector as well. So what does that mean we do then? Well, actually, we design all of the assessment tests in line with the assessment plans that are available on the Institute for Apprenticeships website. And we deliver those assessment tests again in line with those requirements. All of the tests we do deliver and the development of them are quality assured, and we do register and train all of our independent assessors that would either come onto your sites or facilitate endpoint assessment remotely. And it is SIAS's responsibility to claim the apprenticeship award certificate at the end. So by the time you receive confirmation in writing from SIAS that your apprentice has passed or been distinctive, we will already have applied, started that process to apply for the apprenticeship certificate. And once we receive that, we send it to the apprentice at the address of the employer, unless you tell us otherwise. Okay, so that's how we work. So then, standards that we currently deliver. So we've got a small raft of the level 2 standards now. So this is the science manufacturing process operative, the engineering operative, as well as the lean manufacturing operative. A bigger range of the level 3s. So we've got the science manufacturing technician, the lab technician, industry maintenance technician, and more recently the maintenance and operations engineering technician, the MOE technician. And then this is when we come into the sort of the higher level stuff. Now you will notice lab scientist in it. What we're going to talk about this morning isn't currently there. So the lab scientist is now required, and we'll talk about a bit more about that in a second. But we now have the technician scientist that takes its place at level 5, as well as the level 6 lab scientist, the degree apprenticeship. So what happened was the original, if I refer to it as that, the one we're going to talk about this morning, the legacy, I suppose, that retired, and we got the technician and the lab scientist in its place. Following on from that, we do have the science industry process plant degree apprenticeships, that's the SIPI apprenticeship, and then we have the research scientist at level 7 as well. Okay, so there's quite a raft of standards that we've got that service all through the science and engineering from 2 up to 7. So we're going to think, as I've said, a little bit more about the level 5 laboratory scientist one. So this is thinking about carrying out technical and scientific activity in laboratories. This standard is now retired. So it retired in 2019 now, I think. Pardon me, sorry. That means that we can't accept any new registrations on it, but it does mean we service everything that is outstanding, hence why you guys are on the call this morning. So there are still apprentices going through on this. The last registrations would have been 2019, and if you think the training plan, the training period there, it's about a 5-year training period, so we're probably not going to see the end of this for a little while yet. So we've got a couple more years to go through on endpoint assessment. It was the original, so £27,000 funding band, a 5-year training plan followed up with a 12-week EPA period after the training period. 2 gateway requirements. Health and safety gateway is gateway 1. So we would say that this normally happens sort of within the first 6 months of the apprentices starting their programme. And it'll be them starting with the organisation, being inducted, receiving PPE, doing training in the workplace, all of that kind of thing. But because it's health and safety, we say it underpins everything that the apprentice does, and therefore it will be assessed at the end during endpoint assessment. And then we've got Gateway 2. Now, Gateway 2 happens at the end of the training period, or this is where we're looking to check it. So this is once the qualifications have been complete. Now, you'll notice on the legacy, the laboratory scientist that we're going to talk about today, the qualification should just be at least a level 5 qualification or higher. So that did encompass, or does encompass rather, the HND's foundation or a bachelor's degree. And obviously now with the newer standards, you have an either or. So you've got a technician scientist or the lab scientist, the degree apprenticeship as well, which will cover the respective qualifications there. As always, we want our level 2 in English and maths. This might be a functional skill or functional skills, or it might be GCSEs. That's absolutely fine. A signed off behaviours evaluation, again, part of the legacy of the older standards, or the original standards, is that there's a behaviours evaluation in there that's signed off by the employer. And I'm going to talk about that in a few slides' time. And then the original employer sign off in the competency evaluation log, which is the dark blue booklet you get from SIAS. And that's a sign off from the employer to say, yes, my apprentice is ready for endpoint assessment. Their training period has taken place, it's been carried out, and it is finished. All right. So when we're thinking about the methods of assessment, then we've got pass, fail, or distinction across them all. Across all methods of assessment rather. So we've got the case study scenario, the vocational competency discussion, and the synoptic project presentation. Now we're going to start with this one this morning, okay? And we're not going to go straight into the EPA method. We're going to think about the project, put the report together, and then get up to the D on EPA, okay? Because this one's a little bit longer, all right? So if we think about the workplace project, now this isn't what we are assessing at endpoint, but this will allow us to get to endpoint, all right? So this should take place in the final year before Gateway. And what we normally, it would normally be tied in, depending on what the apprentice is doing, but a project that they're probably doing as part of their qualification. Think like a dissertation, all right? That's what it's going to be tied in with. Now, this should have been decided in conjunction with the employer. So the apprentice and the employer should be looking to develop and implement that plan for the project, all right? And it should be allowing the apprentice to demonstrate some practical application of science, but what it must cover is the whole project cycle, all right? So from the problem and identification, right through the planning, doing some laboratory-based experiment, a data review, and then we've got some recommendations at the end, an evaluation and recommendation. So we should get right through the whole project cycle using this project, all right? Now, what I've got on here is what the project should cover. So we should have a planning aspect, a design aspect, and organisation. And you can see the different bullets that we've got underneath there, as well as a review of the literature, project implementation, results and conclusions, and the project scale, all right? Now, we've said this takes place in the final year, so the year on the run up to the end point assessment. You're thinking about 100 hours of project work, and then maybe an additional 50 for the report writing and the write-up as well, okay? So in terms of time frame, we're thinking about a 6 months period before the end point assessment. Now, that might be at the start of the final year, it might be at the end of the final year, but that's ultimately what we're looking at in terms of the time frame, okay? Now, this project presentation, what we need the apprentices to do is then develop a summary report. Now, this is the template that SIAS are going to send you, and I'll talk about when we send that a bit further towards the end there. But this is the template that we send you, which allows the apprentice to then summarise their work-based project and put it into this template to submit to us. Now, this comes to us after Gateway. This is not a Gateway requirement. This is after Gateway. And we're thinking about receiving this about 2 weeks before the EPA date. All right. So you'll be able to see, this is what we'll send in terms of the template. In terms of actually what goes into there then, well, it is a primary journal article that we're asking the apprentices to submit, and it's got a 3,000 word count on it then, and that should be inclusive of all the main text, figures, tables and boxes, but not the references or appendices. We can have them additional, all right? As I've said, it needs to be submitted to us at least 2 weeks prior to the end point assessment date. And the project summary report should include certain areas. All right, so we've got these on here on the screen now. So we've got the problem definition and data analysis, the problem solving method or methods that were used, the solution, and then the business impact, the results, and the conclusion. So we should have at least those 4 areas in this project report. And as I've said, this is submitted to SIAS at least 2 weeks before the EPA date. Now, what this allows the SIAS Assessor to do is just to get a bit of an understanding as to the project that has taken place, and therefore they can start thinking about actually the EPA method, or the actual day of EPA rather, and the questions that they're going to ask about this. So we do not require sight of the actual project. Okay, so the project is taking place in this final year on the run up the gateway. We require sight of the project summary report, which is in the form of a primary journal article, 3,000 words, that is submitted to us after gateway in 2 weeks before the end assessment date. All right. And what we'll speak about now is the actual synoptic project presentation. So this is the endpoint assessment part. So this is the part that we're assessing. Okay, so this is the day of EPA thing. So the purpose of this is to allow the apprentice to demonstrate their work and knowledge of project management procedures and the ability to incorporate these into the scientific work environment, working with their team members. All right. Now, when your apprentice comes to putting their project presentation together, this should last anything between 20 and 25 minutes, and it's very much up to the apprentice how they put this together. They might want a facilitate using presentation, PowerPoint presentation, or any other software along the lines of that. Once they have done their presentation, the follow-up discussion should last a further 25 minutes, and that's based on 4 questions. And I'm going to show you the categories of questions in just a second. Now, when the apprentice is presenting, they should be doing this to an EPA panel, and that EPA panel consists of the SIAS Assessor and the registered assessor. Okay, now again, the registered assessor has already come up because this is the person that's going to be signing off. So in terms of think of the cell, the behaviours, this person will sit in on this. And as I've said, there's some slides at the end that will cover who that person should be. The presentation itself should actually focus on the practical application of the science that underpins the project that the apprentice has put together and the conclusion of that project. Okay, so the project happens in full in the last year. The apprentice then puts together the summary report, 3,000 words, that encompasses the whole of the project and is submitted to us after gateway 2 weeks before the assessment date. And then on the actual assessment date, we are looking to go through their presentation, and their presentation should be or should focus on the application of the science that underpins the project and then that conclusion of that project. Okay. So notice we're making the scope smaller and smaller until it gets to endpoint assessment, and that's what we're going to look at. So presentations 20 to 25 minutes. We've got a discussion that's going to last a further sort of 25 minutes. You're thinking no more than an hour, 45 minutes to an hour for this. The whole session is recorded. All right. The EPA panel will then follow up, as I said, with the discussion. Now, the discussion is going to be based on 4 questions from the following categories. So it's understanding the principles of laboratory techniques, the analysis, interpretation, and presentation of their results, the reasoning behind the recommendations they've put together and the benefit to the business, and the use of personal and professional skills to support the delivery of the project plan. Now, it will be the SIAS Assessor that guides the questioning, but we can see the registered assessor, so the nominated person from the employer, they can be a part of that discussion. All right, now they can't coach or mentor their apprentice through that, but they can ask them some questions as well if they think it's going to benefit this discussion and be around this. So imagine your apprentice, maybe you're sitting there as the registered assessor and you think the apprentice has missed something there and it's going to add value. They could maybe suggest, what about the time when? And they could give them suggestion to talk about. Okay, but they can't coach or mentor that apprentice during that discussion, but they can contribute. All right. So as we've said, this takes about an hour overall. The apprentice would then go off and have a break, and then they're going to come back and do the VCD. What I might add as well is that the apprentice will be marked on this either a fail, a pass, or a distinction, as we said right at the top there. All right. I haven't put the criteria in this only because there's quite a bit of it. But what we will do is, if you don't have your guidance documents already, please reach out to us because it is in there and there's a few pages of it to go through. All right. So there's about 3 pages of criteria and I will send that on to you if you don't already have it. So then, Apprentice then goes on to do their VCD. So if you think the presentation, rather, that's going to take about a morning, although in practice it's about an hour. They're going to have a break and then they'll reconvene and do their vocational competency discussion. So now we're thinking about the extent to which the apprentice understands their requirements of the role as defined by the apprenticeship standard, and to explore the areas that might not have come up during the presentation. And actually, it might be that they talk about the presentation in a bit more detail as well, but equally, we're thinking about their wider role here. So, takes about 1.5 hours. This is how long it's going to be. And we've got 8 categories of questions. As I've said, I'm going to touch on what those questions are in a second. The apprentice can refer to their portfolio of evidence, namely what they've recorded in that cell. So if you're familiar with the cell, the dark blue competency evaluation log that we sent out right at the beginning, they will have a section in there that asks for the evidence record. So we're looking for a signpost to the evidence. It would be worthwhile if your apprentices have a hold of that evidence record on the day during their VCD. Okay, so it might be things that have got company documents in there. It might be I don't know, training evaluation or training records that they've been through, any reflective learning logs that they've had. If they've used maybe it's an e-portfolio, they can get a printout of all of that, the bits that they've got. But that would be ideal if we can have that evidence for the apprentice to refer to whilst they are in their VCD. It isn't marked. It is, again, very much what the apprentice says verbally, but it will be there as a bit of an aid memoir for them. Okay. This is a one-to-one between the SIAS assurer and the apprentice. So the registered assessor or the employer person that was sat on the panel for the morning, they are not required to be a part of this. Okay, it's just the one-to-one, and it should be in a room that is free from distractions. The SIAS assurer will always pose the questions like, tell me about a time when, or can you describe how, or will always relate it back to the apprentice's workplace. Okay, so this shouldn't be theory. This should be exactly what the apprentice will be doing in the workplace and their understanding of the workplace. Okay, so VCD then. So we've got the SIAS assurer. They select the questions from the question bank from the 8 categories. I'll show you the categories in a sec. They will lead the discussion on each question and encourage the apprentice to provide full answers. What we mean by that is if we think the apprentice hasn't understood what we're asking, we will rephrase that question. That doesn't take away from the 8 questions. Or if we think there's a bit more to be heard, we'll ask a follow-up question as well. All right, so we want to understand their full understanding. We will complete some transcript notes during the discussion, and again, the session will be recorded. Okay, it will then be on review that the marks are then allocated. All right, so you will not find out on the day how your apprentice has performed, neither will the apprentice in terms of the VCD. So, categories of questions. These are the 8 categories of questions that your apprentices will be asked around during their VCD. They will always be asked a question 0. Okay, now question 0 is not marked, but question 0 is very much to put them at ease. So if you are thinking along the lines of, okay, then talk to me a little bit about your job, all right? And it's just to put the apprentice at ease and get them into the mindset of what it is that they're going to be doing. The audio recording will have started, but this will not be part of their assessment time, okay? So they still have the 1.5 hours. They will still have a subsequent 8 questions to go through for their VCD. Although I've put them, you know, the numerical on here, it's not necessarily that we will ask a scientific techniques question first, followed by a report and results question, and then a health and safety and environment, okay? It will be very much at the discretion of the SIAS assurer as to what order these categories of questions are asked in, rather. But think about, depending on what the apprentice might have said for question 0, that might lead them quite nicely into one of the areas there that they're going to discuss. Or equally, the SIAS assurer might pick up from something that's happened in the presentation and want to delve a little bit further into that. All right, so those are the categories of questions. Your apprentice will be asked 1 question from each category. And as I've said, there will be follow-up questions and there will be a rephrase if the apprentice doesn't appear to understand what we have asked. We've got an 1.5 hours in which to do that. Okay. Once this section is over for your apprentice, once they've done the VCD, that is the first day of assessment, if you like, over for your apprentice. Okay, they still have, however, the case study to do. We don't do it all in one day. We do it over about a course of a day and a half. All right, so we've then got the scenario-based case study to go through. So this is now thinking about your apprentice's transferable skills and what their sort of knowledge and understanding in a new situation. This is going to take anything up to 2.5 hours. They can take less. Some apprentices do take less. Some apprentices can take up to the time. We can't let it go anything further than that. It will be invigilated by the SIAS Assessor, and again, we're looking for this to take place in a room free from distractions. So, takes place under exam conditions. This is in a room, a silent environment. They cannot take, it's not an open book exam, they can't take anything in with them. The maximum duration is 2.5 hours. As I've said, some apprentices don't take that long and they might leave after an hour and a half, and that's okay. We will complete the invigilation report and then we'll mark it in accordance with the SIAS mark scheme. So as I've said, none of these results are going to be available on the day. If you think about a time frame turnaround, so from the day of the presentation, if you think about 4 to 6 weeks after that date, we will write to confirm the results, and it will be all of the results. So the behaviours is a part of that, the presentation, the VCD and the case study. So there'll be a grade against each. As long as your apprentice is at least passed, we will then have applied for the apprenticeship certificate. Okay. Now, if we just think about the scenario case study tasks, the candidate will be presented with a narrative. So this is a scenario, and it might be an environment that they are familiar with, and it might be one that they are not familiar with. What we need them to do is complete 3 tasks. Okay, so summarize the issues that are in there. These issues are going to be related to things like health and safety, quality, regulatory compliance, those kind of things. They need to think about it holistically. Okay, but those are the kinds of issues we're looking at. We need to then think about, the second task is the apprentice thinking about grouping those incidents and identifying potential root causes. And then the final part is making some recommendations. Okay, so that there is an overview, if you like, of the tasks that will be presented to your apprentice on the day of the case study. Okay, so those there are the apprenticeship methods, the endpoint assessment methods rather, and that's what we are looking to assess on the day of endpoint. What we're going to think now is about tracking the apprenticeship, and this has, I suppose, got a bit more significance because this is probably the basis of what the apprentice is going to bring into the VCD. Okay, so how do we know that our apprentice is progressing? Well, if you're a provider or you're a college, you might have been on site with the learner in the organisation. You might have done some observations. You might have had potential RAs do witness testimonies. Apprentices might have written up reflective accounts, completed some Q&As, done some job reports. Obviously, we've got the use of the qualifications, and there's a variation in there. So remember, we've got the HND or a foundation degree or a bachelor's degree. And obviously, as your apprentice progresses through, they might have completed assessments, they might have sat tests, and you might think, yeah, actually, they're on track, they're doing good. You might have had some additional quals or training in there, okay? So you might have had some GMP training or some IOSH training, anything along the lines of that. But the apprentice should be developing a portfolio of evidence, and that will go, or help them rather, towards the VCD. What we do say, however, is that all of the training, the teaching and the learning should be tracked against the standard, because it is the standard that is being assessed on the day of assessment. So not necessarily how they've performed in their foundation degree, or that, yeah, actually, they're doing brilliantly in health and safety specifically. It's actually how has the apprentice met the standard on the day of assessment. What have they got to show for that? All right. So on registration to SIAS, we issue you, now this could be the provider or the employer, depends where who has been allocated it, and that again is a discussion between the employer and the provider. We issue, however, the SIAS competency evaluation log, which is the dark blue booklet you're sort of seeing it on the top half of your screen, if you like. This is the mandatory sign-off, okay? So this is what we look to the employer to sign off to say, yes, my apprentice is ready, they are good to go for endpoint assessment. And then we have this competency tracker on the bottom. So this is a paper-based version. If you're familiar, again, if you're familiar with the standards, you'll know the early ones had the work-based learning guide attached to them. Tracker is very similar to that. Okay, so this competency tracker can be used by any party. It can be used by the apprentice, by the provider, by the employer. Okay, if you're thinking about maybe putting if you're using like learning portfolio accounts, OneFile, smart assessors, all of that kind of thing, it might be the tracker that you get put online so that your apprentices can upload their evidence against that. Okay, but it is very much used by any of the parties, or indeed not used at all. We do not check this at the end. This is very much for you to track the apprenticeship learning. Okay, now in terms of the cell then, so this is a page you are seeing from your cell, from the cell. You will notice, and I've focused on this for the sign off. All right, so you will notice at the top there, we've got a gateway 1, gateway 2 completion. It's just a quick reminder, gateway 1 is a health and safety gateway. It takes place in the first 6 months, but we check it at endpoint. Gateway 2 is the qualification completion. So H&D, foundation degree, bachelor's, and then we've got the achievement of level 2 in maths and English. It might be GCSEs, might be functional skills. Now, we liaise directly with providers in order to get this information. An employer should only sign this off once they have had confirmation from their provider that their apprentice has passed, achieved a grade in whatever qualification that they have been doing. Okay, so the employer should only sign this off once the provider has confirmed, yeah, your apprentice smashing, they have achieved their foundation degree, this is what they've gotten it, or bachelor's or H&D or whatever that might be. Okay, but it is for the employer to sign off against this. You will then see the box in the middle is the behaviours gateway. Now, this again is for the employer to sign off. Now, this person from the employer, we've talked a lot about the RE, and as I've said, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about the RE at the end, but this might necessarily be the RE that signs off on this behaviours, okay? So it should be a person that is able to make a judgment on the apprentice's personal responsibility, on that communication and the teamwork and the time management, the impact of work and so on. All right, so if that registered assessor maybe sits a little bit too far away from the apprentice to do that, that's okay, as long as there's another member of staff from the organisation that can make this judgment. It is worth pointing out that it is a tick box in here. So we need the employer rather to tick, right, where is your apprentice's behaviours at? But I must make clear to you that this does go towards the apprentice's final apprenticeship grade. Okay, so does not meet expectation would be the same as a fail, and we do not take anyone through to endpoint assessments. So sitting in the project, sitting in the presentation or the VCD, that doesn't happen. Okay, so we don't take anyone through who's currently at a fail. Meets expectation would be the equivalent of a pass, and as with all of the standards, the apprentice needs to fully pass everything in order for them to pass. So they need to be passing every single behaviour to pass. And exceeds expectation would be the equivalent of a distinction. Okay, and again, if your apprentice is looking to be distinctive in their behaviours, they must be distinctive across the board. Okay, so that's in all behaviours. Again, that is down to the employer to make that judgment. So we're not coming in to say, okay, then where is the evidence to say your apprentice is distinctive in personal responsibility? We're just looking for you to make that judgment. Okay. Now, this section here is taken from the tracker. And the reason I picked the tracker is because if you imagine the tracker is a combination, almost like the work-based learning guide and the cell put together. So you will see we've got S1, S2 and S3 statements down the side there. Now, it is only the standard statements that will come up in the cell, but for the purposes of the tracker, we've got all the S statements, and then we've just got numbered statements underneath. So where we've just got, you'll see on here, so we've got S1, S2, S3, and then beneath that we've got 1. This is just a bit of a breakdown of those 3 statements above. Okay, so a little bit more detail in there. How will that be covered? The columns, the subsequent columns beyond that are exactly the same in the competency tracker as they are in the cell. So we've got an evidence record. Well, where is the signpost to the evidence to say that your apprentice can apply knowledge of underlying scientific principles? Okay, and it might be that actually it's taken straight from their foundation degree or HND. Well, where have we recorded that? Well, we're using a OneFile portfolio, or OneFile platform actually. So that's what you would write in there, okay? Imagine this document, this is a work in progress document. As I've said, it can be any parties involved in the apprenticeship agreement that can be using this. what it would aid is if it is filled in sort of during the apprenticeship journey, it will help the employer to do the final sign off at the end. So as I've said, it will only be the S statements that come up in the cell. But if this document has been filled in along the way, it might be that the employer can look at this and go, all right, check that the evidence is there. Yep, I can see that in one file, and they can transfer that information over and sign off against it. Okay, so this is, if this is used as a work in progress document, it should facilitate that final sign off with the employer. Okay, equally, you can then see where if there's any holes or missed parts as we're going through in the training. Well, actually, now what do we need to focus on? We've covered, let's say, the first five, I don't know, first five S statements, for example. What can we pick up beyond this? All right, so that's the cell and the tracker that you get on registration with your for your apprentices. So then we're going to think about preparing for the endpoint assessment, the provider and the employer. Well, what are we going to do? What will we give? How do we help? We will issue the EPA preparing pack. All right. Now we work with the universities or the providers anyway, normally to think about projects and what the projects might be like. In terms of the employer, we will go through some registered assessor induction training. Now, these are just illustrative timelines. Okay. If we can get them in 9 to 6 months, that would be ideal for us. But if you've worked with us previously, you might know that timeline is illustrative. Okay, you might be thinking a little bit closer to the time, so 3 to 6 months before the endpoint. We will think about commencing the EPA scheduling process a little bit after that. So this is now thinking, is your apprentice on track to achieve their qualifications? Yes, okay, then they're going to achieve, let's say, July for sake of argument. We are now looking at an August, September for EPA. All right, so remember, once we have confirmation of that grading or that achievement of a qualification, we have then 12 weeks to go through gateway, to go through endpoint assessment rather. Okay, it is only on receipt of all of the qualifications, that's the level 2 in English and maths, and the degree apprenticeship, that this 12 months is then triggered. 12 months, 12 weeks. That's a very long time, isn't it? That 12 weeks is triggered. Okay, so we would say, right, we're looking to get these results come July. As long as everything's good, we're looking for an August, September date. And you might say to us as an employer, well, actually, we've got a big audit coming in second week in August, or actually, we've got annual leave up until August, so can we have the beginning of September? And that's a conversation that we will have with the employer to facilitate. In terms of the preparing the apprentice pack, she says, we will send this out to all of the employers and the providers. The likelihood is, if you're a provider, you already have this. If you don't, please get in touch with us, because it's just a lot of information that will be really useful for you and your apprentices moving through. You will get guides for all of the assessment methods. So for the scenario-based case study, for preparing for the presentation. Now, this includes the project and the report. So although that isn't, what we're actually assessing on the day of EPA, we do provide guidance around what should be in that project, what are the areas you should be looking at, where will we be allocating marks and things like that. All right, and then preparing for the VCD as well. We also have the mock case study with answers, so we'll send that out, and a template in order for you to issue that to your apprentices to put their report together that can be submitted to us following Gateway. Okay. Beyond that, then, we're thinking about a 2 to 3 months window where we will confirm the EPA dates. Okay. Yeah, that apprentice is on track. University have confirmed it, provider, what have you. So, well, it'll be a little bit less than, it'll be up to 3 months really, but we will confirm that EPA date, and then we're going to request all of that gateway evidence. All right. So as I've said, we might have put provisional dates in based on your apprentices, finishing their university courses or what have you, but we do need to have that gateway before we can go through and do endpoint assessment. We need to have that confirmation. This does include a competency evaluation log as well. All right. Now, the registered assessor and the endpoint assessment. So this is thinking about specifically in terms of the synoptic project presentation, okay, because that's the part we have the employer sitting in on. Remember, the VCD and the case study, very much a one-to-one between the SIAS Assessor and the apprentice. This registered assessor then, so we've given them a bit of airtime today. Who is this person? What do they do? Well, it's an employer nominated person who is competent in the area that is being assessed. Okay, so that's what the assessment plan deems a registered assessor should be. It is not a person who is an assessor. Okay, I mean, there can be, but it doesn't have to be. This is just the terminology that the government and the institute have picked up for a competent person from the employer. An employer nominated person who is competent in the area who's being assessed. All right, so that's the registered assessor. Now, we need a bit of proof that they are competent in that area, okay, before they can be a part of this EPA panel that we go through. So we're thinking about having maybe a CPD record there, or are they professionally registered? Do they have a qualification at the same level or higher of the standard? And do they have experience of current work and practices? Now, yes, will be the answer to all of those things. In order to be the registered assessor, you do need all of those. Now, maybe you have done your BSc or your master's or whatever you might have done, and you've done it a little while back now. If you don't have that certificate for whatever reason, we can't accept a letter from the employer confirming the competence. So don't necessarily worry if you don't have your certs to hand if you are going through this process, but you are competent in the area, you have got your quals, and you do have experience of current work and practices. What we can't do is just get a letter from the employer. It is fairly straightforward. So it's just saying that the employer, whoever that might be a line manager, HR, or anything like that, just saying that the name of the registered assessor is a competent person in order to be acting as the RA, and we'll say for the apprentice on the level 5 laboratory scientist standard. All right. Once we receive all of that, you then go through your registered assessor induction, and that'll take place with me or one of my colleagues. And what we'll do is talk through a bit more about your input on the day and helping your apprentice prepare for that on the day. So it's thinking in terms of, we do touch on the VCD and the case study, but more about the presentation. What should the presentation be like? Putting the apprentice's report together. So loads of the apprentice that's putting that summary report together, that registered assessor rather, needs to be able to review it. They need to be able to understand what was going on in that project. So someone that has an overview of the project, I'm not necessarily saying that they have worked exclusively with the apprentice on that project, but let's say the apprentice has done a meeting with that RA, I don't know, every week as they were going through it, for example. That gives them enough of an understanding to know how that project has panned out. And therefore they can sort of sit on the panel rather for the presentation and the discussion, and they can facilitate that and maybe add a little bit of value there. Okay. Once the induction has taken place, however, they are then issued with a registration number, and that's what you use to sign off the competency evaluation log. Okay, so that is the dark blue booklet, and that number will tie you as the registered assessor or the registered assessor to the apprentice, to the SIAS Assurer, to the standard, and that all goes through for us on the day of EPA. Now, as we've said, the role of the registered assessor, they will complete the gateway review and the sign off before the assessment day. So they're going to complete the evidence record from the cell, and they will do the behaviours evaluation. I have already said that another member of staff from the employer could do the behaviours evaluation if they are not, if they don't work closely enough with the apprentice. That is absolutely fine. But it will be the RA. There's a page within the cell that asks for the SIAS registered assessor validation, and it must be that person that signs into that box. We then look to the registered assessor to support that assessment day. So they are going to review and help the apprentice submit their 3,000 word synoptic paper to SIAS. Remember, this is after gateway. We're thinking at least 2 weeks before the EPA date. This registered assessor is responsible for supporting the EPA, well, supporting the apprentice, I suppose, and the SIAS Assurer during this EPA panel, and they can provide context on sort of workplace policy procedure and all of that kind of thing, just a little bit of context behind the presentation, the subsequent project that the apprentice has done. And we do want them to act as a host for when the SIAS Assurer comes onto the site as well. Okay, so maybe he's meeting them in the morning time, you know, making sure that they can know where the facilities are and all of that kind of thing. Okay, so that's the role of a registered assessor during the level 5 lab science. So that there is pretty much our potted history of the level 5 lab scientist standard.